but I definitely want to touch more on that, but I feel like even that in itself was good because it gives you, some things to think about before you make trades. And you see, hopefully you see like what these look like. When I've seen you plot things before, I want you to look at this and notice like 6 is like where I kind of draw the line. 10 is if it's realistic, if it's based on logic, right? Like these pressure lines are my entry logic. This one is my take profit logic. There's nothing in between. This could work if it happens to fall down and then climb back up. So there is something, to it as far as logic goes. And you see how small overall my red zone is, my stop loss zone is relative to the gain that I'm seeking. Um, and that's why the number is 10, right? It's literally the green zone is about 10 times larger than the red zone. And when I've seen you do some of these in the past, what I would change about your trading is I've seen you kind of open them up, pretty large. If you do that, you want to definitely do it with low leverage, right? Like you were saying, extremely low leverage. And I would automatically change your mind toward going to like no less than a 5. And it's just because that's a Paul Tudor Jones thing. And so if you ever see yourself drawing these things with, nearly half of it is red, or like, you know, um, something like that, a third of it is red, just kind of reevaluate and find a way to find something where at a minimum you're doing something with logic like that, and you have the number here, this risk reward ratio, as at least a 5. And the more leverage that someone is using, like if they happen to find something that's 10x leverage, that's fine. We can get away with that stuff with good data, but you want to tighten it up and find a different logic. And even if you're willing to lose, we'll zoom in on what this looks like. And that's the new logic that would actually make a lot of sense for a 10x trade, right? Because it could go down here. I expect it to run into some sort of support there, probably a great place for a long. And then I don't have any reason to believe that it would get rejected if it continued on until we got at least somewhere up in this vicinity. And so and then have maybe a hard stop up here as a probability, right? And so if I look at those numbers, then that makes a whole lot of sense because that's a 13 parts reward per unit of risk attempt. So it's worth failing, basically, right? Even if you fail, like that was such a well worth it attempt. And with 10x, I'd be looking at making 50% on my capital, whatever the capital is. So that makes sense when I even do the math. And then with that number, I'd have to magnify this by 10 too. So I'd have to be willing to lose about 5%. So then I have to ask myself, gaining 50% of what would be worth losing 5% of what, right? So if I'm successful, if I lose, and I know even with great logic and a great trade that this would probably take a couple days to get down here. This could totally actually happen. But if it did happen, it would take patience. It would require probably a few days. We see it took 3 days just to get up here. So this could even be a week if it happened. But the logic is really beautiful here. And so then all I have to do, now that I've done the math, and I know that I like this number of 13 risk reward ratio, that's really great. I just have to ask myself, this is kind of the easy one to figure out. The hard one is this. And then this is where I just kind of go, maybe, I don't know, 5,000. I don't know what we kind of know what your goals are, right? So maybe I'm willing to lose 5% of 5,000. So I'm willing to lose 250. And then we know if the risk reward ratio is 13.22, then all we have to do is take that 250 and multiply it times 13.22 for our reward. And so I'm willing to lose 250 for 33.05. and that would be a 10x leverage trade with $5,000 of real capital. And so I'm not actually conducting that.
I currently have a math problem. That's the issue.
Yeah,
I have a
maybe, maybe so.
I have a math problem and a patience problem from a point of view of thinking that these algos and what I'm using are to enter today to make money today versus
no. I would say be careful.
I'm just sharing my thought process with that.
Yeah, no, and you're not wrong. The crazy thing is it's almost like a little too much freedom, because I just showed you a multi-day setup, which is based on a lot of logic. You could literally set up both of these trades and just kind of like walk away. You could say, hey, I'm going to short it here, but being that it's a bull market and it could literally like pop through that at this point in time, I'm going to go kind of tight and I'm going to go low leverage. So now I have two layers of security, right? I have a really crazy risk reward ratio. I'm going to do this times 3, right? I'm going to do super low leverage. So I'm only risking at a 3x. My stop loss is pretty darn tight. So I'm just kind of thinking, if this pressure line works, then great, but I'm only going to risk 3x. So what am I now willing to risk? About 3 times this number, right? This is the normal number. So I have to multiply it times 3. So what am I willing to lose 1% of? And so that one, I want to be careful of slippage, because in bull markets, prices sometimes in a matter of minutes blow through, right? Maybe not that much, but they blow through. And so I don't want it to be anything too crazy, but I could even see somebody with this tight of leverage doing 10 grand, right? And they're like, I'm going to do 10 grand because the way I see it is I'm willing to lose about 1, maybe 1.5% of 10 grand. I'm gonna maybe even on a terrible day where it blows right through and price action is extremely fast and my order doesn't get filled quickly, I'm gonna say I lose 2%, right? And so I'm willing to lose $200 because that seems to be a nice spot for me to enter that short. And if I happen to be right, I love the fact that I'll be in a great position on the way down to possibly, is that the one? Yeah, that is the one. To possibly see that 6% gain, right? And so in that scenario, it's 6% times 3x. So I'm looking at 18% on my 10,000. So I'm willing to risk $200 to make, if I'm not mistaken, 1,800. I think that's the math. It actually seems like I might be off because that risk reward ratio is even better than that. But yeah, it would basically be the exchange at, again, a 3x leverage would be treating this as a $30,000 position. So you're basically getting 6% of a 6% gain on $30,000. So that might